Welcome back, dear students. Today we will be discussing about Chapter 6, Section A, the sequence of tenses. And this is basically an important point or topic which will help you to form the sentences in a better and a very proper grammatical way. So you just go through all the rules we are about to study here and try to make use of these in the practical writing so we can have the nice presentation. Few rules to discuss about which will help you a lot and improve your writing in English. Let's take a look at one by one with a detailed explanation and lots of example. Let's start here. First of all, before learning the sequence of tenses, we should know that what is the principle of this. The principle means what is the main motive. The motive is the tense of the subordinate clause follows the tense of the verb in the principal clause. And here it is, most probably we need to be careful about the usages of tenses according to the clause. When there is one sentence, there is no doubt at all of using the tenses and the verbs. But when it divide the sentence into different clauses, just like subordinate and principal or main clause, that timing we need to follow some rules, and in this lesson we are going to focus that only. And here only matters a lot to use the proper tenses because there are two clauses. So before learning here the two main rules governing the sequence of the tenses, we should briefly take a look at about what is a principal and what is a subordinate clause. Take a look at in short and then we'll learn the rules. Let's study here subordinate and main clause. Before that, what does a clause mean? A clause is a combination of related words containing a subject and verb, and it can be a simple sentence or a part of a compound sentence. And sentences combining with the subject and verb generally called as clauses. So it can be have one clause, or in the sentence we can have two clauses. Just take a look at here. She laughed contains subject and verb and gives a complete meaning. It becomes what? Clause 1. Second sentence, I waited for him but he didn't come. In this sentence there are two clauses connected with the word conjunction but, and both the clauses are separate clauses because they do have their own subject and verb. That is, in the first clause we can have I as a subject, waited as a verb. In the second clause, he as a subject, didn't come as a verb. So these two clauses are there. So in a sentence, clauses can be one or two. And if there are two clauses, that can be divided into the different categories. So these two types of clauses are called as independent, that is a main clause, and dependent, that is called as subordinate clause. We'll take a look at in short. That main clause is also called by the name as principal clause. Okay, take a look at here the main clause and subordinate clauses. The main clause or principal clause or independent clause is a clause which expresses a complete meaning and it can stand alone as a sentence. Means the part of a clause which can stand alone and can be used as a separate sentence, it is called as main or independent or principal clause. Look at your example. I saw a man. The underlined one is a main clause, and if you take a look at to the meaning of that, the idea will be clear and you will not have any kind of a doubt. It will give you the full meaning. I saw a man. Completed. Next example, I met a friend who helped me a lot. The underlined word I met a friend is called as independent clause because it can be used as a separate sentence. So these kind of clauses are called as main clauses. Now take a look at what is a subordinate clause or dependent clause mean. It is the clause which as a lone part cannot express a complete meaning. It alone cannot stand as a sentence because it depends on the other clause, that is on independent clause, to give a complete meaning. It serves as a subordinate role in the sentence. In short, subordinate clause cannot give you the complete meaning. For the complete meaning, it has to take the support of independent clause. So out of the sentence, subordinate clause is meaningless because it gives you only half idea. Take a look at the example here. Once again, I saw a man who was crying. The underlined part is a subordinate clause, that is who was crying. If you take a look at only this part, you will not understand what is the perfect meaning of that. Who was crying? The idea is not clear. Next one. The professor asked many questions but no one could answer. The underlined part is subordinate clause. But no one could answer. If you read that, it gives you only complete idea and many doubts arise in your mind. This is called as subordinate clauses. Now, when in a sentence we have the main clause and subordinate clause, that time how to follow the rules of the tenses we shall take a look at here. Now, get back to the rule number 1. The past tense in the principal clause must be followed by a tense of the past time in the subordinate clause. This means the past tense which we are using in the principal clause, the same has to be followed into the subordinate clause too. Means in both the clauses we have to follow past tense. Take a look at your example. He was telling us that he knew the secret of her friend. The principal clause is he was telling us. Look at to the tense here. Was telling, past continuous. That he knew the secret of her friend is a subordinate clause, and the tense followed here knew, that is also past tense. So we need to follow in both the clauses past tense. Next example you see, she knew, past tense, that he would go to Kolkata. Would, past form of will. So that's a general or common rule we need to apply when there are two clauses, but there are some exceptions too. Take a look at the exceptions. Here this rule has 2-3 exceptions, and the first one exception in that, there are however the following exceptions to this rule. What is the exception number 1? If a past tense in the principal clause may be followed by a present tense in the subordinate clause when the subordinate clause expresses some habitual or universal fact. This means if the principal clause is having the past tense, in some cases in subordinate clause we can use present tense. When we can use present tense? When the subordinate clauses are expressing the habituals or universal truths. There are some universal truths and universal facts. If it is expressed, then definitely you have to use present tense. Do not look at to the principal clause which is following the past tense. Try to understand with the example here. Our teacher said that the earth revolves around the sun. Here it is the main clause, our teacher said. And that the earth revolves around the sun, it is subordinate clause. In this sentence if you see, our teacher said, past tense, But the earth revolves around the sun. It is universal fact. And as it is universal fact, the tense followed here it is revolves, that is present tense. Next example try. The saint said that all men are mortal. Said, that is the verb of the main clause, that is in past tense. And here that all men are mortal, look at this are is present tense because it is expressing the habitual or universal fact. So this is the first exception, you should keep it in mind. If it is expressing habitual and universal fact, you should be very careful in using the tenses in both the clauses. Rule number second, that is exception 1. When the subordinate clause is introduced by some conjunctions of comparison, example than. Rule number 1 does not apply at all. Keep it in mind. Any tense can be followed by any tense. Means if we are using the conjunction, that conjunction we use in comparison, that is a than. And if you are using than to join the two clauses, that is principal and main clause, here you should not bother about using the tenses. Any tense can be used, vice versa. This rule is not applicable at all. Focus on the word at all. Look at their explanation. Even if there is a past tense in the principal clause, it may be followed by any tense required by the sense of the subordinate clause when the subordinate clause introduced by than. This means even though the principal clause is having past tense, subordinate clause can take any tense according to the sense required by the subordinate clause when it is joined by the conjunction that. Take a look at here. Example, he respected you better than he respects me. Two clauses connected with the word than. Here respected shows it is a past tense and that is a main clause. But here he respects me, we have used present tense. Same sentence, you can just take a look at here. He will respect you better than he was respecting me. In this sentence we can take a look at the main clause follows will respect, future tense connected by than, and it uses past continuous, that is he was respecting me. So these are the two rules you need to apply properly while applying the rule number 1. These exceptions can be followed by when we are comparing the sentences, and instead of than, if you use the phrase as well as, then too you have to follow the exception which we have studied now. Do not try to follow the rules of past tense to past tense. Take a look at example here. They understood me as well as they understood me. Both are having past tenses. And here you see they will understand me as well as they understood me, him. This means main clause, future tense, and subordinate clause, simple past tense. So we can use any tense in comparison if it is connected by than or as well as. And third exception for the first rule is when the subordinate clause is an adverb clause denoting the place, reason or comparison, it may be in any tense as required by the sense even if there is a past tense in the principal clause. Suppose one principal clause is connected by the adverbial clause, because adverbial clause is also called as subordinate clause. And in that case, if the adverbial clause is expressing place, reason and comparison, in this case also you need not to follow the rule number 1. Take a look at here. A grand city once stood, that is main clause, where now lies the village, and this is subordinate clause but it is adverbial clause. So in main clause we have stood, that is a past tense, and in the subordinate clause we have used lies, that is simple present tense. Second example, she fell because she is weak in Sanskrit. She fell main clause followed past tense. Because she is weak in Sanskrit, that is subordinate clause. Here it is followed by is, that is present tense. So these are the last three exceptions. You can try to understand that. Adverbial clauses and comparison with than and comparison using as well as do not follow the rule number 1. That is about rule number 1. Hope you understood how it works. Now let's study about the rule number 2, and it says that a present or future tense in the principal clause may be followed by any tense in the subordinate clause as required by the sense. This means if the principal clause is containing present or future tense, then in subordinate clause we can use any tense that is required according to the subordinate clause by the sense. For example, take a look at Tanya says that she went to Dehradun. Tanya says, main clause having present tense, that is a says. That she went to Dehradun is a subordinate clause, but here the verb is in past tense. Next one, he will say that Ramesh played a trick on him. He will say, that is a main clause, contains simple future. That Ramesh played a trick on him, here played is past tense, that is in subordinate clause. One exception for the second rule can be noted down here, that is, whenever a subordinate clause expresses purpose, its verb is always the present tense, even if the verb in the principal clause is a present or future. Now, we have learned rule number 2 that if the main clause follows the simple future or present tense, we can use any other form of the tense. But sometimes if the subordinate clause is expressing purpose, that timing in subordinate clause we have to use present tense. Take a look at here. She works hard. She works hard. Main clause. She may survive. In this sentence, if you see, works is a present tense and that is the main clause, and that she may survive, here subordinate clause, but containing the purpose. It is expressing the purpose. As it is expressing the purpose, the tense is present. Next one, he will go to Mumbai that he may attend the conference. He will go, future tense in main clause, that he may attend the class, here it is the subordinate clause, but this subordinate clause contains present tense, and that's a rule number 2. You should note it down. Some notes are there on the based on rule number 2, and you can just note it down that the first one, if the conjunction introducing the subordinate clause is a lest, the verb in the subordinate clause has a should, irrespective of the tense of the verb in the principal clause. If the subordinate clause and the main clause is connected with the word lest, that timing the subordinate clause has to follow should, not to worry about the tense used into the main clause. Take a look at here. He will be careful lest he should fall. In these cases, he will be careful, it is a main clause, will be, it is a future tense. But in the subordinate clause, should is used. Third example, he was careful lest he should fall. Was careful, was past tense, lest, as it is connecting main clause with the subordinate clause, it should follow by using the word should. And here this rule is applicable when it is connected with the word lest. Note number 2, when a subordinate clause is introduced by as though or as if, the past tense is generally used to indicate the present time and the past perfect to denote the past time. Here sometimes subordinate clauses are connected or used or introduced by using as though or as if. So here we use past tense generally to represent the present time and the past perfect to denote the past time. Take a look at here. She treated him as if he were her own son. Here the two clauses are connected with as if. In the main clause we have used the word treated, that is a past tense. Here in the second one, subordinate clause, we have used had been, that is a past time, and that is used to denote the indicate present and past time. Take a look at the second example. He behaves as though it were nothing to be ashamed of. Here the main clause follows the verb, that is behaved, connected with the as though, and in subordinate clause we have used it had been nothing to be ashamed of. Had been past tense. So in order to mark out the time in both the clauses we can use past tense. So this was the rule number 2. Now after learning about the rule number 1 and 2 in detail, here take a look at how we can apply the sequence of tenses in the conditional sentences. This is an example. Conditional sentences, I hope that we have to study in some other chapter in detail. Here an overlook of it. That means in type 1 of conditional sentences, the tense of the verb in the principal clause is future and that of the subordinate clause is a present. Means principal clause future tense, subordinate clause present tense. Look at the example. Unless she apologizes, he will not meet her again. Unless she apologizes, subordinate clause followed present tense, that is apologizes, and he will not meet her again, it's a main clause takes future tense. Second example, if it is cloudy, they will postpone the match. Here if it is cloudy, subordinate clause takes a present tense and they will postpone the match. Main clause takes simple future. So this is how the rule of the sequence of tenses followed in both the clauses, and this is what you should keep it in mind while forming the sentences, and it will help you to brush up your writing work in English language, and it will give some kind of a strong impact in presentation of your writing in a better way. So repeat the rules and try to implement according to the rules we have studied here, and finally it will help you to make the proper sentences and have the nice expressions in writing English. Hope you understood this, as we have discussed thoroughly about all the rules in detail. Here is an exercise for you. Try to complete the exercise in the notebook, and some other homework you'll be getting in your school application. Thanks a lot for watching. Do take care of yourself. Thank you.